Julian had a woman he loved in his youth. The day she returned, divorced, I was forgotten in a downpour. That day, I borrowed an umbrella from a passing street cleaner. Then I went to the airport and bought a ticket for the next available flight. I thought, anywhere is fine, as long as there's no Julian and no Sophie. At 6 o'clock, Julian's car pulled up to the house. The maid, not his wife Ivy, came out to greet him. Only then did Julian remember. He had been so worried about Sophie that he'd forgotten to pick Ivy up from the market. But it didn't matter. His wife had a gentle nature and would never get angry over such a small thing. At 7 o'clock, the rain stopped. The sky was dark, but Ivy still hadn't come home. A strange sense of panic began to creep into Julian's heart. He called her 3 times. The first call went unanswered. The second and third calls wouldn't go through at all. The storm had come suddenly, as if the sky had turned black in an instant. I ran, disheveled, to shelter under the eaves of a roadside building. I stared blankly at the torrential rain. An hour ago, Julian had said he would come pick me up and take me home. But now, there was still no sign of him. The other young women sheltering beside me were picked up one by one. Their boyfriends or husbands carefully tilted umbrellas over their heads, protecting them. I imagined Julian was probably doing the same for Sophie right now, just as meticulously. She was the woman he had loved in his youth, a woman he had lost through a twist of fate. I heard she had suffered greatly in her marriage. During the 3 months of her divorce proceedings, Sophie's mother had also passed away. Julian was often so worried he couldn't sleep, sighing through the night. And today was the day Sophie was finally, successfully divorced and returning to the country. This morning, after his shower, Julian had put on a brand new, custom, tailored suit. The tie he chose was patterned with faint datura flowers. Since we married, I had taken care of every aspect of his life, from his food to his wardrobe. But that tie was not one I had bought for him. The rain was relentless, drumming down like a chaotic beat. But my heart suddenly grew quiet. "Ma'am," I said with a smile, waving to a passing street cleaner. I traded the fresh seafood I'd just bought for the old umbrella in her hand. Seeing her overwhelming joy, I couldn't help but smile myself. The umbrella was old, but it could shield me from the wind and rain, better than a man who never showed up. I walked out of the market and hailed a taxi on the street. It wasn't until I reached the airport that I realized I had nowhere to go. The only family I had left was my grandmother. But if I went to her, the old woman would know immediately that I had been wronged. In the end, I simply bought a ticket for the next available flight. I thought, anywhere is fine, as long as there's no Julian and no Sophie. For 3 years of marriage, Sophie had been like the air, silently filling every corner of my life. I couldn't endure it any longer. Just before boarding the plane, my phone suddenly rang. It was Julian. I thought for a moment, then let it ring. When the ringing stopped, I moved his number to my blacklist. Julian arrived home at 6 o'clock. When the car stopped, only the maid came to greet him. He paused. After taking off his coat, he didn't hand it to the maid, but draped it over his arm instead. "Where is my wife? Mrs. Hayes hasn't returned yet." Julian stopped in his tracks. He finally remembered that Ivy had gone to the market on a whim to buy fresh seafood. He had promised to pick her up on the way home. But Sophie had collapsed in tears at her mother's grave. He had rushed her to the hospital and completely forgotten about picking up his wife. Julian glanced at the pouring rain outside. A faint sense of guilt pricked him. Would Ivy be angry? But the thought had barely formed before he shook his head with a smile. He had never met anyone with a gentler, more forgiving nature than his wife. She would never get angry over such a small thing. "Sir, you're soaked from the rain. You should go upstairs and take a hot bath," the maid suggested quietly. Julian nodded. "If my wife returns, tell her I'm upstairs." He went upstairs and soaked in a hot bath. But for some reason, even the bath felt unsettling. When he came out of the bathroom, he felt a bit congested. He wanted to take some cold medicine but couldn't find the first aid kit. Julian checked his watch. It was almost 7. And Ivy still wasn't back. The rain outside seemed to have stopped, but the sky had grown even darker. He took out his phone and dialed Ivy's number. It rang for a long time, but no one answered. It eventually disconnected on its own. Julian frowned. This had never happened before. Ivy would never miss his call. Perhaps she was stuck in traffic due to the storm, or had a small accident on the road. Julian felt his heart clench. He quickly dialed a second time, but the number that had been reachable just moments ago was now unavailable. His brow furrowed deeper, his expression turning cold. He patiently tried a third time. Still unreachable. He stood there for a long time, phone in hand. Then, he did a quick search online. Oh, so this is what it meant to be blocked by the other party. Julian suddenly let out an angry laugh. He thought he should take back his earlier statement about never having met anyone with a gentler, more forgiving nature than his wife. It was late at night when the plane landed in a strange city. As the signal returned, new messages trickled into my phone. I noticed several texts from an unknown number. Hello, Ivy. This is Sophie. I heard that you and Julian had a fight because of me and that you haven't come home. I'm very worried. And I'm so sorry. I think I need to explain things between Julian and me. It's true he used to like me, but that was when we were children. Julian has always called me sister, and I've always seen him as a little brother. I never wanted to cause a rift between you two. No one wishes for Julian's happiness more than I do. Ivy, when you get this message, could you please call him back? Or at least let us know you're safe. I found it laughable. If they were so worried about my safety, there were a million ways to find me. With Julian's family background, checking my travel information would be effortless. But after I left home, the first person to contact me wasn't the police. It was Sophie. I was utterly sick of it. Of how every little thing in my life was immediately known to Sophie. I didn't reply, but Sophie was persistent. She called me. I answered. The other end of the line was silent. After a moment, a low, soft laugh came through. Then, Sophie's voice. So, you're not as wonderful as Julian made you out to be. You really are patient. It took you 3 years to finally act out. Ivy, Sophie said, her tone shifting as she called my name. Since you're willing to step aside, I'll have Julian give you a generous settlement. I chuckled. Miss Sophie, you've been through a difficult divorce yourself, so I'm sure you're an expert. I'll leave it in your capable hands. If the settlement is large enough, I'll treat you to coffee. With that, I hung up. Then I blocked the number and set my phone to reject all calls from unknown numbers. On the third day of Ivy's absence, Julian called her grandmother, who lived thousands of miles away. After some pleasantries, he tentatively brought it up. Grandma, Ivy was just saying the other day how much she wanted to visit you. No need. I'm doing just fine. It's too far. Don't trouble yourselves. Julian clutched the phone. From the large terrace, he could see the setting sun. His heart seemed to sink with it. Bit by bit, he knew Ivy had only this one relative left. So he had naturally assumed she was just pouting and had gone to her grandmother's for a while. But she hadn't. So, where had Ivy been these past few days? He turned and his eyes fell on her familiar vanity table. It was as clean as ever, but her hairbrush hadn't been put away. He walked over and picked it up. A few long strands of hair were tangled in the bristles. Ivy's hair was beautiful, dark and healthy, never permed or dyed. He clutched the brush, lost in thought. Sophie's call came through a second time before he snapped out of it. Julian, I just passed by your garden and saw the roses have all withered. Sophie's gentle voice floated through the phone. You should have the gardener clear them away. They look awful. Don't. It was the first time he had ever directly refused Sophie. She was clearly taken aback, but quickly recovered. Julian, are you angry? Of course. This is your and Ivy's home. It's for you two to decide. Sophie's voice ended in a choked sob. Julian's heart softened again. That's not what I meant. Sophie, is there any news about Ivy? No. It's all my fault. I never should have come back. Sophie began to cry softly, listening to her quiet sobs. Julian felt an uncharacteristic wave of irritation. Ivy rarely cried. Only on their wedding night. When it hurt, she had cried a little in his arms. And once during their first year of marriage, when he missed her birthday. He seemed to recall it was because Sophie's husband had been abusive, and he had been so worried that he'd flown abroad overnight. Julian felt inexplicably agitated. Married for 3 years. He never knew Ivy had such a stubborn and willful side. He walked to the bed and sat down. After a long pause, he decided to call Ivy's only close friend. The friend was shocked and said she hadn't heard from Ivy. Ivy hadn't gone to her city either. When Julian hung up, his hand was trembling slightly. He lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it. Ivy was a bit of a neat freak. When she was home, every corner of the house was spotless and free of any odor. The phone rang again. It was an unfamiliar landline number. Normally, he would never answer such a call, but this time, he picked it up immediately. "Hello," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Julian, it's me, Ivy." For some reason, when he heard Ivy's familiar voice, Julian, who was usually a man of few words, found himself speaking with uncharacteristic harshness. "Ivy, you're not a 3-year-old child. Is running away from home something a woman your age should be doing? Do you have any idea what kind of negative impact this will have on the Hayes family if it gets out?" "I'm sorry." Julian gripped the phone, loosening his tie. He felt the heavy stone in his chest suddenly lift. "If you know you were wrong, then come back." His tone softened. "Julian, I called for another reason." "What is it?" "I sent you something. It should have arrived by now. What's so important that you had to mail it? You could have just brought it back with you." Ivy's voice was as gentle and calm as ever. "I'm not coming home. Please check your mail for a package. If you have no objections after reading it, sign it. I'll call you again in 2 days. I'm using someone else's phone, so don't call this number back." "I won't get it." "Ivy, what are you talking about?" Julian felt his heart, which had just relaxed, leap back into his throat. "Julian, being married to you for 3 years, I haven't been very happy. So, let's get a divorce." Julian didn't speak. Ivy was also silent, as if politely waiting for his answer. "Where are you now?" "That's not important." Julian glanced at the silent twilight outside the window. "Ivy, what kind of tantrum are you throwing?" On the other end of the line, Ivy didn't say another word. She seemed to let out a very quiet laugh. Then, she hung up. Julian almost instinctively redialed the number. But the person who answered was a stranger, an older woman. She spoke in a dialect Julian couldn't understand. He could only apologize and hang up. The twilight deepened, and he sat there in the growing darkness, motionless. For 3 years, Ivy had been like a glass of lukewarm water, always a steady 5 degrees. She never got angry, never lost her temper. She always spoke in a soft, gentle voice. Everyone liked her, praised her, so much so that he had almost forgotten. Their marriage was originally just the resolution of a debt between their elders, and a woman who could secure the position of the Hayes family's daughter-in-law with such a flimsy connection. How could she be as harmless and guileless as she appeared? Julian turned and walked to the vanity. Setting down the comb he had been holding, he saw his reflection in the mirror. A furrowed brow, a storm of anger in his eyes. He, who was usually so emotionally controlled, was now repeatedly losing his composure over this small matter. Julian quickly schooled his features back into their usual impassive expression. He strode out of the master bedroom and went downstairs. Sophie called out to him from the living room, but he only gave a faint acknowledgement. He asked the maid to bring him the day's mail. Julian sorted through it, found the envelope from Ivy, and tore it open. Sophie, standing nearby, let out a soft gasp, covering her mouth. Julian expressionlessly tore the divorce agreement to shreds and threw it in the trash. "Julian." Sophie stepped forward and gently tugged on his sleeve, her voice soft and persuasive. "Don't be angry. Ivy was probably just being impulsive. She's always so gentle and reasonable. I suppose it's my fault. If I hadn't come back, if I hadn't troubled you with my problems, she wouldn't have thrown a fit." Julian's voice was cold. "What does this have to do with you? It's her own immaturity. And isn't her immaturity your fault for spoiling her?" Sophie forced a smile. "I heard all about how loving you two were, even when I was abroad." Her words trailed off as tears welled in her eyes. Julian sneered. "Why I married her? Others might not know, but you do, don't you?" Sophie looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Julian, was it really because of me?" Julian didn't answer, simply pulling his sleeve from her grasp. "I have to go out. Should I have the driver take you home? Or will you stay here?" Sophie wiped her tears. "I'll wait for you here. With you and Ivy in this state, I wouldn't be able to sleep if I went home." Julian nodded and instructed the maid to prepare a guest room. He had the driver bring the car around and left without another word. Sophie watched him go. She glanced at the shredded divorce agreement in the trash, Her lips tightened as she slowly sat down on the sofa. Why did Julian tear up the divorce papers? He didn't seem to want a divorce from Ivy at all. I knew from the day I left. For Julian, finding someone's whereabouts was as easy as lifting a finger. It all depended on whether he wanted to or not. So, when I saw Julian standing outside the guest house, I wasn't particularly surprised. In the early autumn weather, he wore a light gray trench coat, leaning against his car and smoking. He was handsome and tall, his every move drawing attention. In comparison, I looked exceptionally plain. A loose linen dress, my long hair tied up casually with a handkerchief, no makeup, carrying a grocery bag from the supermarket. I looked more like one of the young maids from the Hayes family estate. When we first married, I often felt inadequate, but now, I had come to terms with it. Just as a home-cooked meal could never be served at a luxurious banquet. Julian and I were wrong for each other from the start. He stubbed out his cigarette and looked at me, his expression impassive. I put down the heavy grocery bag. Julian glanced at his watch. His voice as cool and detached as ever. Go pack your things. 30 minutes should be enough. Did you sign it? I held out my hand to him. Give me the signed divorce agreement, and I'll go back with you to finalize the paperwork. Julian's cool eyes showed no emotion, though they seemed to darken slightly. Now is not a good time to announce our divorce. Then we won't announce it, just as long as the papers are filed. Ivy, you know the company's anniversary gala is next week. You need to attend with me. A faint, mocking smile touched Julian's lips. Your timing is impeccable, but you should know, I'm not one to be easily manipulated. I didn't speak, just looked at him quietly. We had shared the most intimate acts a husband and wife could, but men can separate sex from love. Women cannot. That rainstorm hadn't drenched my body, but it had soaked my heart. But Julian would never understand, because he had never loved me. If you sign the divorce papers, I will attend the anniversary gala with you next week. Whatever cooperation the company needs from me, I will provide. I looked at him, even managing a gentle smile, just like I used to. Julian, there is absolutely no downside for you in this. Fine. He stared at me for a long time before finally nodding. After the company gala next week, I will sign. I didn't go back with Julian. I only flew back to the city the day before the company's anniversary gala, to avoid gossip reporters writing sensational stories about our marriage. His personal car picked me up directly from the airport and took me back to our marital home. When I got out of the car, Sophie greeted me as if she were the lady of the house. Ivy, you're finally back. She hurried forward, taking my hands, her eyes red as if she was about to cry. I looked at her coolly. Her clothes, her jewelry, her makeup, all had clearly been meticulously chosen. It was a kind of understated, comfortable luxury, the kind of attire a matriarch or young lady of a wealthy family would wear when entertaining guests in her own home. I didn't speak, just pulled my hands away. Sophie had a beautiful manicure, a gemstone ring and a diamond ring on her slender, fair fingers. My hands were bare. My wedding ring had been taken off long ago. There was even a thin callus on my palm. When I first learned of Sophie's existence, I used to foolishly compare myself to her in my mind. But now, no matter how beautiful or elegant she was, my heart felt no ripple at all. I didn't look at her again, nor did I respond. I picked up my bag and walked past her. Sophie bit her lip. Embarrassed, a maid came over to help. Ma'am, let me carry that for you. I smiled and sidestepped her. No, thank you. The maid didn't dare insist and looked helplessly at Julian. Let her be, Julian said, his gaze shifting away as he walked towards the main house. But I didn't follow him to the main house. Instead, I went to the guest wing. Ivy. Julian's anger finally flared. Perhaps it was because my actions, in front of all the servants, were a great embarrassment to him and Sophie. I didn't stop, nor did I answer. I had no desire to communicate with Julian at all. All I wanted now was for the anniversary gala to be over quickly. Then, our marriage could also end quickly. The atmosphere was at its peak when Julian and I entered the banquet hall. Arm in arm, he played the part of a gentle, considerate husband. And I, as always, was the universally praised, graceful wife. As we mingled, he held my hand, our fingers intertwined. From time to time, he would turn to look at me, his eyes soft. I would respond with a demure smile. But before, that smile came from a place of genuine shyness and joy. Now, it was a mask. I despised this version of myself. And I despised him. I just wanted it to be over soon. But towards the end of the dinner, a dish of sashimi was placed before me. The faint, fishy smell hit my nostrils, and my stomach suddenly churned. I excused myself ungracefully and rushed to the restroom, where I was violently ill. As I stood up, the world went black, and I fainted. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital. Many members of the Hayes family were there. Julian was sitting by my bed. He took my hand, his face lit with a rare joy. "Ivy, do you know, you're pregnant. Just over 40. 5 days. His voice was low and gentle, as if he were afraid of startling me. For a moment, I was dazed. Julian rarely showed such overt tenderness. In 3 years, it had only happened a handful of times. And in those 3 years, he had met with Sophie very few times as well. But every time, he was exceedingly gentle. His tenderness towards Sophie was simply because he loved her. My tenderness from him, in the past, was never for my sake. And now, it was only for the child in my womb. Your grandmother already knows you're pregnant. He squeezed my hand, a soft smile on his lips. I've already arranged for someone to bring her here. She's overjoyed. She was so emotional on the phone she started crying. Lying in the bed, tears suddenly fell from my eyes. My inability to conceive in 3 years of marriage had been a great worry for my grandmother. But she never knew the reason I wasn't pregnant was because Julian had said he didn't want children yet. He wanted to enjoy a few years of just the two of us. He had always been very careful with contraception. So why was he so happy now? After the Hayes family left, the room fell silent. Julian brought me a glass of water. Don't mention divorce again. Just focus on your health and the baby. I pushed the warm water away. I don't want this child. The expression on Julian's face didn't change. He looked down at me. You can tell your grandmother yourself. If you have the heart to make an old woman like her suffer for you. Julian was certain that I would continue to compromise to spare my grandmother from worry. But he had forgotten. In her youth, my grandmother had dared to defy her parents by unbinding her feet. She had dared to break off an engagement and run away, traveling 1,000 miles to seek refuge with relatives. When her husband became a drug addict, she had dared to divorce him decisively and secretly take her only daughter with her. Now she was old, seemingly frail and kind, at peace with the world. But I knew that if my grandmother found out about Julian and me, she would support any decision I made. Julian canceled all his work commitments. He began to devote himself entirely to me. The news that I had fainted at the anniversary gala and was discovered to be pregnant had already spread like wildfire. Reporters and media swarmed the hospital. On the day of my discharge, the Hayes family came to pick me up with great fanfare. Everyone said I was lucky to have married into the Hayes family from my background, with a considerate husband, doting in-laws, and now a child on the way. I was, by all accounts, a winner in life. It's laughable, really. Society often judges a woman's success by the chips her male counterpart gives her. No one pays attention to the woman herself. No one cares about the turbulent undercurrents of her actual life. Sophie has already left the city. Her maternal family wants her to go live with them. In the car, Julian took my hand. I told you from the beginning, what's between Sophie and me isn't romantic love. We grew up together. When we were young, she cut her forehead saving me. She still has the scar. I was fond of her as a child, but now, I just see her as a sister. Ivy, you have no reason to be petty about such a small thing. However, since it bothers you, I will be more careful in the future. I won't meet with Sophie privately anymore, nor will I have any other contact with her. Julian took my shoulders, trying to pull me into his arms. Let's put this behind us. We have a child now. Let's be a happy family of 3. Okay. To be honest, for a moment, I almost believed him. I'd heard that when a woman is pregnant, she secretes a hormone. That hormone makes it difficult for her to harm the tiny embryo inside her. These past few days, I had been conflicted, torn, and wavering. My grandmother had even told me, a husband can belong to someone else, but a child is always your own. Honestly, for a moment, I considered it. Perhaps discovering the pregnancy at this time was a second chance for Julian and me. No woman wants to kill her own child. I was no exception. But just as I was wavering, Sophie found a way to contact me. Do you know why Julian suddenly stopped using protection 6 months ago? I paused. It was true. That was around the time he had stopped being so careful. Because that's when I decided to get a divorce. You must be thinking, if I was getting a divorce, Julian should have been even more careful, right? Sophie laughed at this point. Her laugh was jarring, almost desolate. Ivy, I can't have children. If I could, do you think Julian would have ever compromised and married you? So, do you know how your child came to be? This baby was only conceived to pave the way for me. I wasn't supposed to tell you this now. I was supposed to wait until the child was born. But Ivy, her voice was laced with a destructive jealousy. I've changed my mind. I'd rather destroy this path than let you have Julian's child. I sat there, feeling a deep cold spread through my body. It was a chill that seemed to seep up from the soles of my feet and permeate my entire being. But surprisingly, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. I knew, with absolute clarity, that all my feelings for Julian, all my attachments, had just drifted away. Have you ever considered that I might listen to you and insist on having this child anyway? That's not your character. You appear gentle, forgiving, patient, and tolerant. But you can't stand a single grain of sand in your eye. I suddenly laughed. Sophie, thank you for telling me this. Ivy, don't hate me. I just love him too much. You know, love is always selfish and blind. I didn't reply. I ended the call, stood up, and walked to the window. In the twilight, the roses in the garden had almost all withered. A gust of wind blew, and the last remaining flower on a stark branch fell to the earth. The flower had fallen. It was time for the dream to end. On the day Julian had his last dinner with Ivy, she wore a light green dress. The dress looked familiar. He thought for a moment before remembering. She seemed to have worn a similar one the first time they met. Back then, he had lost his battle with his family. Sophie, heartbroken and in despair, had married and moved abroad. He had gone to meet Ivy as a formality, planning to find an excuse to dismiss her. But he had barely begun his cruel and harsh words when her eyes filled with tears. Julian had never seen a girl cry so much. Her eyes were large, and tears pooled in them before falling in a torrent. She choked out, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were being forced to meet me. I'll go back and tell my family to call off our engagement." She was so mortified by his callous words that she couldn't stop crying. Yet, she kept apologizing to him. Julian watched her stand up, only to knock over her coffee. The dark stains spread across her light green dress. She looked down, trying to wipe it, as tears fell one by one. For some reason, his heart stirred. He thought of his hopeless love. He thought of Sophie, now another man's wife. A sense of weary resignation washed over him. "Your name is Ivy, right?" She flinched, then nodded. "Yes. Do you want to marry me?" She clutched the hem of her dress, biting her lip. Her long, curly lashes fell, hiding her reddened eyes. She nodded faintly, her face turning crimson. "Then let's get married." Her eyes flew open in shock and disbelief. But you just said." He smiled, leaning back in his chair and looking at her lazily. The men of the Hayes family were all handsome, and back then he was still young and had a touch of rakish charm. As he looked at her with that smile, she became so shy she couldn't meet his gaze. "I was just teasing you, Ivy. Please don't go and tattle to my grandmother." She quickly shook her head. I won't tell on you." After she said that, even her ears turned bright red, and she didn't dare look at him again. After the date, he drove her home. When she got out of the car, he took her hand. 3 months later, they were engaged. 7 months later, she married him. And now, after 3 years of marriage, she was carrying their child. Julian felt a strange emotion stirring within him. This child had been part of his plan. He should be happy, but that happiness seemed to be tinged with something else. These past few days, he couldn't stop thinking, would the child be a boy or a girl? A boy would be best, of course. But if it was a girl, and she looked like Ivy, that wouldn't be so bad either. But why would he want the child to look like Ivy? His original plan was for this child to call Sophie Mother. Julian had a sinking feeling that things were starting to spiral out of his control. But, strangely, he had no desire to pull back from the brink. He felt an inexplicable urge to let it all go, to lose control completely. That night's dinner was prepared by Ivy herself. She had no morning sickness that day and was in good spirits, so he let her be. She even joined him in a small glass of fruit wine that was safe for pregnant women. As he grew slightly tipsy, he thought Ivy looked exceptionally beautiful. "Are you wearing makeup?" "Just a little. The lipstick color is beautiful." "Thank you," she said, her eyes curving into a smile. He smiled too. He stood up, walked behind her, and placed his hands on the arms of her chair. Julian lowered his head, the bridge of his nose brushing against her thick hair at her temple. It was an intimate, tender moment. "Should I have the maids move your things back to the master bedroom?" She didn't nod, but she didn't shake her head either. She just raised her glass and clinked it against his. Later, he took her for a walk in the garden. The moon was bright, the stars were sparse, and the lawn was scattered with a layer of withered rose petals. She was very quiet on the walk. Only the early autumn wind rustled the hem of her long dress. Julian followed behind her, suddenly feeling a little drunk. The scene had a certain air of peaceful, domestic bliss. He couldn't remember clearly if she returned to the master bedroom or not. He slept deeply and for a long time. When he woke up, it was already noon the next day. He rolled over, his hand instinctively reaching for the other side of the bed. Ivy. The hangover made his head ache. He managed to sit up with some effort. The bedroom was empty. There was only one pillow on the large bed. She hadn't stayed with him last night, and Julian didn't know it then. But it wasn't just last night. For all the days and nights to come, Ivy would never set foot in this place again. When I came out of the procedure, my grandmother was waiting to take me home. I was wrapped in a thick coat but still shivered with cold. The anesthesia was wearing off, and a dull ache began to throb deep in my abdomen. My grandmother pressed a hot water bottle to my stomach and held my hand tightly. "Ivy, let's go home with Grandma." Her back was a little stooped, her legs bent, but her hands were still warm and strong. They gave me the immense courage I needed to move forward. I told the Hayes family back then that we didn't want any repayment of favors. Grandma understands better than anyone that marrying so far above one's station is a mistake. Now that it's come to this, Grandma doesn't blame anyone. "I just feel for you, my dear." I leaned on my grandmother's shoulder like a child. "If you feel for me, then make me a bowl of steamed egg custard. I haven't had Grandma's egg custard in so long. From now on, Grandma will make it for you every day." I supported my grandmother, and she supported me. The midday sun fell on us, and I finally felt a warmth return to my body. As we reached the hospital entrance, I saw Julian's car. He got out, his face grim, his lips pressed into a thin line. My grandmother instinctively tried to shield me behind her, but I gently shook my head. Julian strode up to me and grabbed my shoulders. "Ivy, where is the child?" "It's gone. I had it terminated." "How could you? How could you?" "Ivy." He gripped my shoulders, his fingers tightening. I saw his face, pale and ashen. His eyes swirled with a mixture of rage and pain. "Does it hurt?" "Good." I pried his fingers off, one by one. "Please sign the papers quickly and finalize the divorce." "I will not divorce you," Julian said, his voice cold and deliberate, each word a block of ice. I was surprised, but felt no strong emotion. "Then we'll go to court. If you want to make this a public spectacle, if you want the so-called beautiful story to become the town's laughingstock." I smiled indifferently. "I'm ready when you are." Julian was about to say more, but his phone suddenly rang. I vaguely heard Sophie's name again. His expression changed. "I know. I'll be right there," he said hastily. He hung up and looked at me again. "Ivy, wait for me to come back. We need to talk properly." But I didn't wait for him to come back and talk. I went directly to see Mrs. Hayes. I didn't hide anything, nor did I add a single embellishment. I simply repeated what Sophie had told me, word for word. Years ago, Mrs. Hayes couldn't accept the infertile Sophie. She played the villain, breaking up the young lovers. Then, holding her nose, she had been forced by the family elders to accept a daughter-in-law like me. For 3 years, she had been cool towards me, but not unkind. She had actually been very happy when she learned I was pregnant. But now, her grandchild was gone. I thought, even if she hated me, she would hate Sophie more. If Sophie wanted to get back together with Julian, She would never get past Mrs. Hayes. Sophie was right about one thing. I was not a forgiving person. I was petty. I wanted the person I loved to have eyes only for me. And I wanted the people who hurt me not to live happily ever after. Because when they hurt an innocent person, they never showed an ounce of mercy or guilt. Mrs. Hayes was a decisive woman, just as she had swiftly broken up the young couple years ago, forcing Sophie to marry and move abroad. She acted again, with Mrs. Hayes's thunderous intervention. My divorce from Julian was quickly finalized. As for Sophie, under pressure from Mrs. Hayes, her own family began forcing her to marry again. I heard she even attempted suicide. Julian stayed by her side in the hospital for a day and a night. I also heard that Julian was determined to marry Sophie. Mrs. Hayes was so furious she slapped him twice and threatened to disown him. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. I followed my grandmother back to the small county town 1,000 miles away. I renovated her little courtyard, planning to plant it full of roses next spring. While I was still recovering, Julian suddenly showed up. My grandmother didn't open the courtyard gate. He stood outside for a long time, finally leaving in the early hours of the morning. But the next day, when I went out to get the milk, I saw him again. In the early winter weather, he wore only a thin coat, while I was bundled up in one of my grandmother's thick cotton robes. You see, we were always people from two different worlds. The neighbors watched him with curiosity, lingering. After all, it was rare to see such a handsome and wealthy-looking man in our small town. But I only glanced at him once before looking away. As a young woman, I had been drawn to his looks and had married him without a second thought. But marriage is like drinking water. You alone know if it's cold or warm. I had made my choice, and I accepted the consequences. Julian didn't speak, but he followed me. I got the milk, bought breakfast, and turned back. He followed me all the way to my courtyard gate. Ivy. He finally spoke my name. I didn't stop. I pushed open the gate, went inside, and turned to close it. But Julian stepped forward, blocking it with his hand. Ivy. Sophie is getting married next spring. As an adult, I don't think I had ever lost my temper with anyone. I never even argued with people. But this time, I suddenly lashed out. The warm milk splashed all over his face. It stained his ridiculously expensive coat and the cashmere sweater underneath. He looked stunned, his brow furrowed. Ivy. Julian, if you were the one she was marrying next spring, I would at least respect you as a man. But as it stands, it seems you don't love her that much either. After all you had to do was give up your status as the Hayes family heir, and you could have married her. But you couldn't do it. Ivy's words were only half right. He didn't love Sophie that much. But it wasn't because he couldn't part with his inheritance. It was because he truly, long ago, had stopped loving her the way he did in his youth. After Ivy got pregnant, Julian had actually considered it. The three of them. A happy family. He would bury that filthy and despicable thought deep in his heart forever. He had crossed a line with Sophie one night in a foreign country out of sympathy and pity. And in a moment of impulse, he had made her promises about a child and marriage. But in truth, he had regretted it for a long time. But Sophie told Ivy. And then, without hesitation, she had gotten rid of their child. The moment he learned the child was gone, Julian had only one thought. He couldn't keep Ivy. Like a fallen rose. Once it was gone, it was gone. But in their marital home, Ivy's presence was everywhere. The maids would often let slip. Ma'am used to. Ma'am liked. If Ma'am knew. And then there was himself. Every day at 6 o'clock, when he came home, even knowing she was long gone, he still hoped it would be her coming out to greet him. He used to think of Ivy as a glass of bland, lukewarm water, an unimportant presence. But how can a person live without water? He often thought back to their last dinner. The way she looked after a little fruit wine. The color of her lipstick that day was so beautiful. He often wondered, what if, during their walk later, he had taken her hand? What if he had hugged her from behind? What if he had whispered, honey? Would she have softened? Given him one more chance. He also often wondered, what if he hadn't forgotten to pick her up in the rain that day? What if he had appeared before her right on time? Would the story have had a completely different ending? But to think about these things now was meaningless. He could only tell himself to look forward. Ivy was still single. Ivy had turned down many suitors. And after all, Ivy had once loved him very, very much. He would visit her town 2 or 3 times a year. But on his 9th visit, the same story replayed itself. Only this time, the leading man was no longer him. The rain was pouring that day, just like the day he had forgotten to pick her up. But this time, the leading man didn't make the same mistake. In the torrential rain, a man's car stopped steadily. Ivy was sheltering under some eaves. When she saw the car, she started to run towards it. But the man waved his hand, stopping her. He first ran out into the rain himself, getting soaked as he retrieved an umbrella. Then he hurried to her side. The opened umbrella tilted almost entirely over her, protecting her as she got into the car. It was such a short distance, only 2 or 3 steps. But the man couldn't bear for her to get even a single drop of rain on her. Preferring to get drenched himself, Julian sat in his car, staring blankly at the scene. The windshield wipers swished back and forth frantically. The entire world seemed to be swallowed by the rain. The car carrying Ivy sped away, disappearing from sight. And the rainstorm from years ago, the one where he had forgotten her, now, after so long, poured down upon him. Julian gave a bitter smile. He started the car and turned it around. The car shot forward like an arrow, piercing the dense curtain of rain. In that instant, he seemed to see a younger, more naive Ivy again. They had just gotten engaged. His mother didn't like her, but his grandmother adored her. At their engagement, his grandmother had told her, "Ivy, dear, if Julian bullies you, come and tell Grandma. Grandma will stand up for you." So back then, whenever he teased her until she blushed, she would always say, "I'm going to tell on you to Grandma." He couldn't help but smile at the memory. He thought of their wedding night. She had cried from the pain. And as he held her, he had joked, "Why aren't you going to tell Grandma on me now?" She had laughed through her tears. Then, annoyed, she had lunged forward and bitten him. And he had lowered his head and kissed her. And she had become pliant, closing her eyes beneath him. Julian finally understood. He had fallen for Ivy the moment he first saw her. What a pity it was that people so often lamented a fallen flower, yet rarely rejoiced in or cherished its bloom. The year after his divorce from Ivy, the roses in their marital home all withered and died. But in a small town 1,000 miles away, a grandmother's courtyard was full of blooming roses. But those beautiful, blooming flowers no longer belonged to him. Julian suddenly tilted his head back. He was afraid he would break down and cry. A pathetic sight. Here, in the pouring rain, in the new life that Ivy had already begun,